Next on Imagenes, the making of the PBS special Black and White in Exile. Saludos, I'm Miguel Perez. The public broadcasting system, better known as PBS, is focusing more attention nowadays on Latino issues. On the heels of the successful and nationally acclaimed Mi Puerto Rico documentary comes another intriguing video series documenting the struggles of Cuban and Haitian refugees. The title, Black and White in Exile, opens the door to our discussion with series producer Ray Blanco. Ray, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you for having me.
It sounds like a very exciting job that you've been doing lately. How long did it take you? And tell me all about it.
It was 4 years. It was $495,000, which is about 1/3 of what a documentary series of this nature cost. And I had to do it. It was one of those things that you have in your systems. As you know, it's part of my history. It's part of your history, so it had to be documented. It had to be done.
When you say part of your history, it's because you're Cuban American.
Because I'm Cuban American, but I think more importantly because I'm an American. And this is an American story. This is just not a Cuban story. This is not just a Haitian story. It's about what's going on in this country today.
Mm-hmm. And you said it cost?
$495,000, which I'm in debt to the tune of about 120, so we're working on it.
Okay, and from what I understand, there's been already a couple of screenings of the series. What has been the reaction of people who've seen it already?
Well, the good thing is, because it's people have considered this a controversial topic, some people had forewarned me that taking this to Miami might create some problems. But I'm happy to report that nobody died. It was a huge success. The Miami Herald gave us a stunning review, and the reaction in the public, what I was happy to see is that we had, for example, white and Jewish people who attended the public screening very supportive and wanting to see more, which was a nice feeling.
But what about the reaction from the Cuban and the Haitian communities?
Some people were really taken aback. I think that, like someone said to me, to see it all, to see 4 decades in 2 hours and 20 minutes, because we showed the whole thing, was a lot to take. Some people were moved to tears, some people were just shocked. We've come a long way.
So when you say 4 decades, this is like a retrospect of the last 40 years of immigration by Cubans and Haitians into
Correct.
South Florida.
Correct. South Florida as well as New York and New Jersey. I mean, the story is of people that have come both to the Northeast as well as to other parts of the country as well as South Florida.
Mm-hmm. And again, the Cuban community and the Haitian community was not apprehensive about any segment of the programming?
No, because I think we were fair, balanced, and objective, and that was the task. I don't think that there's really no bad guys in this. There are people that I disagree with. It is not a point of view documentary. I did not insert myself. I just kept saying, okay, if we're dealing with a Cuban story, what would be the white questions that would come up? What would be the black reaction? What would be the Haitian reaction? And I took that role with each story that we told. What would the other communities involved think?
How is this different than the stories that have been done about the European immigrants coming in through Ellis Island, for example? Is this similar type of documentary, updating the American immigration story?
Absolutely. I think that the difference here is that you have two communities. As you know, most people consider Cubans as totally white, which is not a fact. And everyone considers that Haitians are all black. Well, when we started talking about the issue of race, many Haitians, like a scholar told me, you could be black, but if you have money in Haiti, you are considered white. So the issue of race became fascinating to me, and I think we did a good job in telling that story.
So you're not only dealing with race, but you're dealing with class and status
Absolutely.
And financial income.
And immigration as well. Like I said, there's no one really good or bad here. They're just people who were desperate to get to this country and what happened once they got here.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a good look at the opening scene.
Good.
Desperate refugees from Cuba and Haiti have been fleeing terrorism since the late 1950s. Many risked their lives to reach the United States. In exile, they struggled to survive while trying to restore democracy in their homeland. Clashes erupted with Americans, both black and white. The immigrant struggle is supposed to be the story of America. The reality today is far more complicated. This is America's continuing saga.
You're dealing with very complex issues here. You're dealing with immigration, with foreign policy, with race. How do you balance the act? I mean, it must be very difficult.
Well, I think we interviewed over 75 individuals, some who were scholars, some who were community leaders, some who were just ordinary citizens. And to make that cut to, I believe, finally 38 people appear in the series. We had over 100 hours of archival research. We have issues that are very complex. And as you know from television, you have to make things simple and still get your point across. So we chose to do individual vignettes that were historically accurate and brought the story forward with each segment. But it was a challenge to try to keep a focus. For example, we don't really deal with the events that were happening necessarily in Cuba or in Haiti unless it was specifically related to what was going on here. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have said, well, why didn't you show more of Fidel as an example? And I said, well, that really had nothing to do with our story here. They were already here. We know why they left. Now what happens? However, with Maria, we had to take viewers back to Cuba because that incident created the situation here.
Mm-hmm. The first, it's a 3-part series.
It's actually 6 parts. It's 6 half hours, but NJN and other stations are showing it as hours. So there's
So we will be showing it as a 3-part series of 1 hour apiece.
Correct.
Okay, and the first episode is called Lost Dreams, New Hope.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at that.
Well, I don't think it is a good thing that the Cubans are living in Miami, for one thing. I don't believe we should be giving them the money that we're giving them. And I think they should be back up in their own country where they belong.
I remember my mother going to the Cuban refugee center at the, I still call it refugio, you know, the Freedom Tower on Biscayne. We were given, I guess, financial support, and we were given some kind of meal, some products, horrible, horrible milk and ugly meat in a can, and
I went to the Cuban Refugee Center too, that same tower. So it brings back memories.
Does it bring back memory that meat in a can?
Yes, I remember that. I remember the peanut butter. They gave us peanut butter and a big chunk of cheese like this.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, that was, you know, when we were selecting this, and I had other people from other races and other ethnic groups participating in the production, and they kept saying, why do you need to keep that bite in there? What's the importance of that? And I said, any Cuban refugee that either went there or the ones up in New York, remember that meat in a can. Years later, we would find that it was Spam.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was, what is this thing?
Yeah, we were not used to that meat in the can.
No,
Cuban time. Tell me about the problems of the Cubans and how you deal with that, the early arrival of Cubans in Miami. I saw some racism there. A woman expressing in the early 1960s that Cubans should stay back home. How did you deal with that in the documentary?
We dealt with it straightforward, as you saw. We presented what we had documented from people back then, as well as witnesses to those events. We also included what was going on in the Cuban community. So we had a variety of different points of view, and we just presented it there. Good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not going to make that judgment call.
Okay, I think we want to look at another segment now of the early arrival of Cubans in South Florida. So let's look at that.
In 1959, the rebels succeeded and ousted Batista after the demoralized Cuban army collapsed from internal corruption. Fidel Castro assumed power.
The original concept of the Cuban Revolution that took power on 1st of January 1959 was to overthrow Batista, who had an illegal government, to create a democratic society with a just agrarian reform, to encourage suffrage, to do social reform. This was supported by probably 90% of the Cuban people.
Okay, tell me about the struggles of the Haitian community.
The Haitian community was, at the same time that Cubans were coming to this country in the early 60s, were completely denied. While Cubans were being welcomed with open arms, Haitians were basically sent back. And we found some incredible footage that basically established U.S. foreign policy later on.
Mm-hmm. And that double standard that they complained about, the treatment the Cubans were getting as opposed to the Haitians?
It depends on how you view communism. If you, one of our spokespeople said, if you look at communism as an economic structure, then both should have been allowed in.
Mm-hmm. And also race.
Race. Well, we have to look.
I mean,
back.
I remember interviewing Haitian refugees as late as in Guantanamo base, when the massive amounts of Haitians and Cubans were coming, and they not only complained about the economic status versus the political status that Cubans were giving, and they were being given economic status. They were also saying it was racism.
That's been the claim of the Haitian community and many observers, that clearly it was Cubans were white, Haitians were black, and therefore, and let's look at back in the 60s as well as the 70s, this country was going through a race relation turmoil.
At the same time, I was just coming back from the Cuban camp on Guantanamo, and I was telling the Haitians, hey, there's a lot of blacks over there, a lot of black Cubans over there. Well, they weren't seeing each other, they were separated, but the Haitians were not aware that there were a lot of black Cubans also coming.
Well, I think Americans are not aware that there are a lot of black Cubans. And it really began, I think, with Miguel, the first time that we began to see black Cubans come to this country. Before that, everyone thought that all Cubans were white.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a look at the Haitians arriving.
In the summer of 1963, the Tonton Macoute conducted a brutal campaign of terror. Anticipating an invasion from Haitian exiles, Papa Doc's goon squads torched all homes in a 2-mile wide zone along their border. A group of 25 refugees from this burned-out border zone escaped to Florida via the Bahamas, but they were caught by the U.S. Immigration Service. A lengthy trial was held to determine if they were entitled to political asylum. The trial dragged on for 4 months, prompting a hunger strike from the refugees, who would rather die than return to the brutality of their homeland. But U.S. immigration deported the exiles back to the Bahamas.
If I remember correctly, all of them were killed eventually by the Duvalier dictatorship, and under the suspicion that they harbored communist leaning.
Despite the dire consequences for the exiles, this incident reinforced United States immigration policy toward the Haitians as economic, non-political refugees.
Big difference there, economic and political. The politicals are giving a green light, and the economic refugees are usually giving a red light.
Correct. It was, for me, it was very disheartening, because you could see those faces on those people. And you could see that they were in terror, they were fleeing. Mm-hmm. And for whatever the reasons, this country chose not to accept them.
And there were times when they were both stopped, different Haitian boats and Cuban boats were stopped at sea, and the Cubans were put on the PT Coast Guard boat, and the Haitians were turned around. Yeah. And they saw this themselves.
They saw this themselves, and the whole world saw this. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing.
Let me ask you, did you deal, because there was another side to the double standard that the Cubans like to point out. We've pointed out the Haitian problem, but Cubans point to the fact that, and I point to this fact myself being a Cuban, the fact that the double standard came later as well, when the United States helped Haiti liberate itself and not Cuba. And so the double standard turned around.
I didn't deal with that issue. Okay, but I would say some people would say that the U.S., even though it failed, did attempt early on in the 60s, and CIA reports now reveal that it's a fact, that the U.S. did try to overthrow Fidel Castro. So it did help, not with a direct invasion, but clearly it did help topple a dictator.
No, but I'm talking about in recent years.
In recent years.
When Haiti, when there was a blockade of Haiti, when several American, Jimmy Carter and others went to Haiti and negotiated, tried to get the dictator out of Haiti.
Right.
Eventually did, solve the immigration problem by dealing with the problem in Haiti.
Right.
The United States has not done that for Cubans.
No, it's we don't know what the future of Cuba is at this point, especially with U.S. foreign policy. I think it changes. All we know is that Fidel has outlasted every American president since
About
Eisenhower.
9 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Martin Luther King made a very important prediction that you deal with in your series. He said that forcing Cubans and blacks to fight against each other was a real problem.
Yeah, this was one of those things that in this process, when you're looking at hundreds of hours of documentary footage and you're trying to give viewers a sense of what was going on in this country at the same time, you come across gems. And I think that the Martin Luther King prediction that the powers that be, the political forces in South Florida, would eventually create a fraction between these two groups was prophetic.
Yeah, let's look at it.
The social dilemma in Miami is unique in that it has both Negro and Cuban refugees flooding the job market, seeking the same menial, low-paying jobs. But it would be cruel and indeed inhuman for the power structure to pit these two ethnic groups against one another in competition for mere survival, thereby creating explosive tensions that might one day become a blight upon this lovely community.
I just remember feeling very, very frustrated. I remember going to several meetings where people were screaming and hollering about not getting jobs. I remember people talking about not having the ability to feed their children. I remember for the first time, probably in my life, feeling a sense that I truly was living in poverty.
I would say the Cubans, they have come over here and took our jobs, that the employers will hire them and lay us off because they work cheaper than we do, that we don't have any jobs now.
That was a real fear in the early 60s in South Florida by the black community.
It is still a fear. It is still, I mean...
There's still apprehension about Cubans taking black jobs away from blacks?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it still goes on to this day. I don't think that issue has been resolved. And we saw that later on in the 90s erupt. There is a big difference between the treatment that both groups have received. I mean, let's face it, Cubans today, for all intents and purposes in business, run Miami.
And I know that it still happens in terms of empowerment. There's a big fight over how many Cubans get on the city commission, how many blacks get on the city commission. But then again, Martin Luther King basically set it up. Why are we fighting for crumbs?
That's right.
When we should be uniting. The minority groups should be working together.
Absolutely. But look at what's happening in L.A., in Watts, where the hospitals workers are all blacks and the patients are all Mexican Americans, and the same conflicts that are happening in South Florida are happening in LA. So it's, yeah, they're fighting over crumbs.
There's also something that you deal with you mentioned that earlier, that Americans don't think about the fact that there are a lot of black Cubans. You deal with that in the series. Let's look at that.
With Mariel refugees making their way into American society, the issue of race arose for black Cubans.
We always consider ourselves Cuban first. This society considers you black, period. It doesn't matter if black with an accent, black with this, black with, you're black.
Black Cubans not only were not seen but not heard. Even though there were reports in the media about black Cubans, I know that black Americans were not coming into contact with them. Black Cubans were not a part of the leadership of any organization that was visible to Miami. And so this was really a recurring joke in the black community that black Cubans were really like Santa Claus. People talked about them and you saw pictures of them, but you never met them.
The more I watch this, Ray, the more I want to see your entire series.
Thank you.
And it's a good time now to tell our viewers when it is that will be airing on NJN.
On NJN, it begins April 5th for 3 consecutive Sundays at 10 o'clock in the evening.
So 10, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday.
No, just Sunday, 3 Sundays.
Three Sundays in a row. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you right. Okay, 3 Sundays in a row. So you have to wait a whole week before you get the second part.
I think it's enough. I think 1 hour a week is enough.
Okay. There are a lot of other segments that we want to look at, or at least 2 or 3 more that we want to look at of your series, because it's so important. And I want to get to the very next one because it's something I covered as a reporter. I was working for the New York Daily News, and I was sent down there to cover the riots, the black riots, when the McDuffie case came up. McDuffie was a Haitian.
No, McDuffie was a black American.
He was not a Haitian.
No, he was a black American who was an insurance agent, former ex-Marine, who made a couple of mistakes. I don't know what segment you're going to show, but
he was beaten to death by Miami police officers.
He was beaten to death by the Miami police.
And that started the riots.
And that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was there. Let's look at this.
Beat my child to death. They beat him to death like a dog. Like a dog. They beat him to death. They beat up his head like a dog.
With over 125,000 new immigrants, South Florida was a powder keg of anger and frustration.
When Arthur McDuffie was killed, and the medical examiner said to all of Miami that his skull was cracked like an egg, Black Miami was outraged. First, because we felt from the beginning that the justice system was trying to cover up this murder. Secondly, because the justice system insulted us by taking the case and moving it to another community. Third, because the decision in this important racially tinged case was decided by all white jury.
I remember distinctly how the community was outraged, the black community, and how everybody else was very apprehensive about what may happen to all of Miami at that time. It was a very serious situation.
I mean, this city of Miami, the South Florida, has gone through so many riots. I mean, when you look at the series from the 60s through the 80s, it was just one event after another. It was just a powder keg.
I think we only have time for one more video, but I think our viewers should see this one. It's about how the black community really didn't identify with the Haitian problem until very late. I remember blacks were not really into their fellow black Haitians and their plight until very late. And you have a segment here that deals with dead bodies arriving at the beach, and let's watch that. It's very powerful.
Since the end of the 70s, Haitians had been steadily streaming into the United States. The nation was shocked by dead bodies washing onto their beaches.
When I looked at that photograph in the Miami Herald the morning after this tragedy took place, my initial reaction was that one of the women looked like my aunt. It was a very striking resemblance to someone I knew very well, very closely. So after that, the Haitian immigration problem became less academic for me and much more real as a personal issue. I had to go to Chrome after that. I had to join the effort to close the camp.
Wow, that's very, very powerful. And again, the black American community identified, I think, more than ever when those bodies were washing up in the beaches of South Florida, right?
I think it's a wake-up call not only for black Americans, but certainly they mobilized themselves. But I think for America as a whole, I think this made the problem real. And, you know, we had a lot of concerns about showing these graphic images, but we felt it was important to show. I mean, that's the power of television, to show a story rather than to talk about it.
Well, I'm glad you got this monkey off your back. In 4 years of work, I congratulate you. It looks like it's a terrific effort on your part, and we're looking forward to seeing it. I was very impressed by what I've just seen, and I've just seen segments, but hopefully I'll be able to see the whole thing. I'll tape the whole thing and share it with my Cuban friends.
Good.
Good luck to you, Ray.
Thank you.
Pleasure having you on the program. And I want to take a moment to remind our viewers that Imagenes will celebrate its 25th anniversary with a dinner dance on Saturday, June 6, 1998 at Newark's Robert Treat Hotel. It will feature many celebrities who have been on this show over the years, and we hope you will join us there. For ticket information, call Imagenes at 973-648-7085. or the Center for Latino Arts and Culture at 732-932-1263, or the Center for Hispanic Policy and Research and Development at area code 609-948-3223. I'm Miguel Perez, and I'll see you next week on another edition of Imagenes. Hasta pronto.